Hi, my name is Peter van der Putten. I'm an assistant professor at Leiden University, and I'm going to talk about Trust Me, I Am an AI, presentation at the SAILS AI and Law Conference. And this is joint work with my former students, Jamil, Donna, Evelien and Joost. And I'd like to thank my colleague Martin Lamers as well. So what do people think about when they hear the word AI? Probably something comes to mind like robots that are taking over the world. Common meme, already popularized, let's say, in the 1920s, when there was a big sci-fi movie as well as a play on that particular topic. But this is not just imaginary. If we want to reap the benefits of AI, we need to make sure that that we can build AI that's worthy of our trust. So the EU is proposing new regulations last April, also built on earlier work around particular AI principles for trustworthy AI. Around robustness and safety and fairness and transparency, explainability, all these principles, they form part of these ethic guidelines of trustworthy AI, but we see these same principles in a lot of AI policy. So I think this whole question of when should we trust the AI or when could we trust the AI, it's really important. Computer scientists are also working on algorithms where we can actually test for bias in a automated decision, for example. But I think there's also other questions that are really interesting. Not so much when should we or could we trust the AI, but more from a psychological perspective. When do people trust an AI, or how do they bond to an AI, or why? And so not so much could or should, but how does it work with more, let's say, on a psychological or philosophical level? And that takes me back to one of the reasons why personally I'm interested in AI, because we can learn more about intelligence. Where is it coming from? How can we learn? It's ultimately a fascination with ourselves, and that goes also beyond, of course, intelligence. Also interesting to learn about other things that make us human, like creativity and emotions. So that perspective of not so much, when could or should we trust the AI, but actually, when, in reality, when is it when people bond with an AI? How do they do that? Why do they trust them? I think that's also a very relevant perspective, especially also from AI policy perspective. And we have this human nature. It's kind of innate for us to attribute intelligence, not just intelligence, but also emotions and motives on the other. You see a movie here from a famous psychological experiment from the 1940s, by Heider and Simmel, where they showed these movies to people and then asked them to factually describe what was happening in a movie. And was never saying, well, this is, I see two triangles and a square. They would always tell a story about, two kids wanted to play together, but daddy didn't want them to, or something of that nature. And so it's really something that's deep inside ourselves, that we want to attribute not just intelligence, but also emotions, feelings, intentions onto the other. So you see another example here. This was a robot that was built, housed in the Evelien in the south of the Netherlands in Eindhoven in the 1970s. And again, no AI inside, just simple feedback mechanisms. But you can see, it's really interacting with the public, and the public is really interacting with the creature. And we cannot help but projecting intentions, emotions, intelligence, drives on top of the robot here. And that's not very strange, because that's how we work, that's how we operate. So American philosopher Daniel Dennett, they call it the intentional stance. Where first we maybe, when we meet another, first we kind of decide we want to treat you like a creature, which means that we kind of then say, hey, you have certain purposes, certain goals, certain beliefs, certain desires, and so that will actually help us to predict what you want to do, because by assuming these things, we can predict what you might might likely want to do. Yeah, and that's of course very useful if 30,000 years ago we would encounter a saber-toothed tiger. It helps if we say, well, let's treat you like another living being. You're probably hungry, so maybe I should climb this particular tree. Yeah, and so that will help us predict the behaviors of the other in the world. And that could include how we're actually dealing with artificial objects like AIs or robots. Yeah, so it's really interesting if you have this big statement here, trust me, I am an AI. If we want to study trust, is to really look at it from that perspective. When do we trust an AI? When do we bond with an AI? When do we obey to an AI? Or if I turn it around, not when can I trust an AI, when can the AI trust a human? So this is the first of 3 experiments that I will quickly describe that fall into this category. Yeah, so would I lie to an AI? What we did here actually, this was about honesty in responses by people. And we had 3 conditions. One where we would ask you questions just through text in the top right corner. Bottom right, same questions, but using a video of someone we taped, and we also made her look maybe a little bit on the artificial side. And the 3rd condition was an avatar. And we're interested, like, in which situation are you most truthful? Yeah, so as a proxy, we looked at desirability. It turned out that, people gave the most honest answers if it was through text, and the most social desirable answer as a proxy for potential dishonesty or pleasing behavior if the other was an avatar. So it made a difference. Yeah, so statistical significance aside, because results were maybe not significant at the statistical level, it's interesting to see these differences, and could encourage further research in this particular topic. Second topic: when would I obey an AI, and does it matter also how do we frame the AI? The research that I'm going to present here was actually inspired by research from the 50s around groupthink. So when do we obey other people? Yeah, so I'm going to run a quick movie just to, that explains that particular research by the group of ASH.
The experiment you'll be taking part in today involves the perception of lengths of lines. As you can see here, I have a number of cards, and on each card there are several lines. Your task is a very simple one. You're to look at the line on the left and determine which of the 3 lines on the right is equal to it in length. All right, we'll proceed in this order. You'll give your answer.
Only one of the people in the group is a real subject, the 5th person with the white t-shirt. The others are confederates of the experimenter and have been told to give wrong answers on some of the trials. The experiment begins uneventfully as subjects give their judgments.
2, 2, 2, 2,
2,
3,
3,
3, 3.
But on the 3rd trial, something happens.
2,
2,
2,
2,
2.
The subject denies the evidence of his own eyes and yields to group influence.
So this inspired Evelien Mols to research algorithmic authority or obedience to an AI. So we basically took the same idea of Ash's experiment here, but now we didn't look at groupthink between a human and humans, but a human and an AI. And she picked, inspired by another piece of research, she picked by design a somewhat contentious type of decision, namely who to fire. If you need to lay off people, who would be the best person to fire? Participants were instructed to fire those people who scored lowest on average on a range of scales. So let's have a quick look at a movie here, what the experience for a participant was. So first there was some consent that was given, an explanation of the game, and then the task would begin. You can see here 5 employees with different ratings on those skills. And people were simply asked factually to take the average of those skills and fire the person with the lowest average skill. So very similar to the ASH experiment. And then we would increase the pressure by, well, at first you can see here we have 15 seconds to make a decision, but gradually we would lower the amount of time that was available. Here you can see to 12. And then we would start to offer support from an AI to help people make these decisions. Yeah, we had different ways how we framed the effectiveness or the efficiency of the AI. And these different ways are, one is confidence, so with a statement around the accuracy of the AI. One was more around historical usage, so it has been used for a long time already. The third one was around social proof, so this AI has been used by a lot of other people in the experiment. And the third one was talking about the qualifications of the people that actually developed the AI. In the beginning, the AI would give proper advice, but then after having built that trust, it would alternate between giving the right suggestions and wrong suggestions. So you see the outcomes here. In 70% of the cases, roughly, people would follow the advice of the AI, except for condition number 5 here, and that was when we presented the AI as something that a lot of other people in the experiment actually used. Yeah, so it's interesting to see, there's a lot of reliance on the AI, or at least an appetite to follow the advice of the AI in roughly 70% of cases, unless we introduce the AI as something that was used by other people. So you could say that people trust the AI, but they don't trust other people that much. Yeah, so it's maybe a little bit of a warning sign that people are, under certain conditions, people are quite eager to accept the advice of an AI without thinking by themselves. Third question, would I bond with an AI? So trust and bonding, of course, that's related. And Joost Mollen here, one of my students, he asked the question, well, when do people bond with a robot? Yeah, so, and of course you can build robots that look like people or look like animals, appearance, that's one way for people to bond. The other one is, well, maybe it doesn't look like a human or an animal, but it has certain behavior that's interesting and that entices us to bond. But he said, let's look at a new dimension. I want to create robots that are minimal, human-like in appearance, as well as in behavior, and let's look at common locus. So are we spending a lot of time and place together with a robot, and maybe that bond will grow as well, because we'll have shared experiences. So he created these robots. They don't look like humans at all. They're just blocks. They have this small smiley, but there's also minimal behavior because during the day they're awake and at night they go to sleep. And these are couchsurfing robots. So we just gave them to people, and it had a message that said hey, I want to stay with you for a while. And if you're fed up with me, just give me to the next person. And every once in a while, there's a phone number. Every once in a while, let my parents know how I'm doing. Yeah, so, and these couchsurfing robots, they would travel the world from family to family, and every once in a while, we would get messages back, and it would be it was interesting to interpret those messages. So you could see, for example, the robots would be, photographed with other, quote, alive creatures. And also people would try to maintain the common locus. So at some point they would take the robot with them. If they would leave the house to go sit on a terrace, go to their work, or to the park, they would actually take the robot with them. And so we analyzed those pictures and we saw those same patterns that Dennett spoke about. That first you want to decide that you want to treat the other as a creature. Yeah. So typically we would see here that attribution of gender and name is most common, so that's maybe an indication of that initial decision. And then we start to attribute agency, emotion, social needs, preferences, intentions onto the other. Yeah, so interesting result, interesting type of way to actually study trust and bonding with the artificial. Yeah, so, and you can see all of these researchers, they try to kind of look at this idea of when do we trust an AI, not so much from the perspective of the AI ethics principles introduced earlier, because that's more around when could or should we trust an AI, but more from the perspective when people, more when do people trust an AI, or when do they obey an AI, when do they bond with an AI? And for that, we can see that people project things like intelligence onto the artificial other, but not just intelligence, also emotions and motives and intentions. So we should go and study beyond artificial intelligence, also study artificial emotions, artificial creativity, artificial whatever people project onto the other. And with that, I'm at the end of my presentation. If you would like to know more, just Google me or look me up on Twitter, and I'm more than happy to engage with you. Thank you very much.